you have bad ideas, it will bring harm into your life. You begin to go down this road of transitioning, or your friend goes down this road of transitioning, and it will just bring physical harm, psychological harm, spiritual harm. And that's why we care so much about this. Not because we want to just go out there and fight some culture war or something like that, but it's because these ideas within the culture have huge consequences.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Maven Parent Podcast. It's been a little while. Where have you been, Brett?
It's been a long while, and really we actually had to take a break from the Maven Parent Podcast because it was creating a lot of tension it was because actually Erin had an opportunity for a really good project called the Strong Women Podcast with our good friends at the Colson Center. And basically, she kind of ditched Maven and said, hey, I'm going to go to this bigger platform and build my brand, right?
False.
It wasn't
false.
No, it was a great opportunity
Yeah.
to really try to help lay out a biblical vision of femininity, what it means to be a woman in God's design, with good friend, partner, Sarah Stone Street. So we had to put pause on the Maven Parent Podcast for a little bit, but we are back in full force. In fact, we are now planning weekly episodes. Did you want me to say that out loud? Because now we're accountable.
Now we are accountable. Weekly episodes. That's a lot.
Bi-weekly of it. No, we're going weekly with this.
We can do it.
There's a huge need for it. So anyway,
there's certainly enough to talk about, is there not, in culture, in the church, in parenting? I mean, there's no shortage of topics to talk about. We've been wanting to talk about things, so it's good to be back. And
yes, so welcome back, Erin.
Thanks.
Welcome back, audience. All right, so we're gonna take probably this podcast and the next one to address just the elephant in the cultural room, right? The issue that makes the news, it seems like every week, and that's the issue of gender identity.
Yeah, actually, it made the news today. You and I saw a story. Headline is Father Jailed for Referring to Biological Female Child as His Daughter. So this was the headline today. And just a quick summary of the story. This is a family in Canada, just to be clear, not in America where we are. The warrant was issued by a judge for the arrest of a father after calling his biological female child his daughter and referring to her with the pronouns she and her. The father was found to be in contempt of court. The father is a father to a gender non-conforming biological female, 16 years old, who identifies as transgender and prefers the use of male pronouns. The father has repeatedly called this person his daughter, though the court has forbade it. The transition has been underway for more than 2 years. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Vancouver time, the father surrendered himself to the court in response to the Attorney General of British Columbia's warrant for his arrest for contempt. He was arrested and jailed. That is stunning.
It's that phrase, truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes that's the point that we've reached in the culture, where we're reading about a dad being jailed for referring to his daughter with female pronouns. And it's maybe good to pause, and the fact that for some of us that might not shock us that much shows how the culture just kind of chips away things that really are what's the word, crazy? That defy common sense, like a dad referring to his daughter by saying she or her.
Or just referring to her. It said the court told him not to refer to her as his daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I think too, if we hear that and we aren't really shaken by that, I think it might show that we are starting to get used to and maybe starting to sympathize with these ideas that are so contrary to reality and what it should be, that if that doesn't really shake us, especially as parents.
Yeah, it shows we're being desensitized.
Yeah.
Being desensitized to these things. And then that's how things get normalized. And we see this in the culture. So this is the issue we want to address, because whether you and I like it or not, this affects our kids. And if you are a parent, you're gonna have to think carefully through this. We as parents are thinking carefully through this, and then figure out how do we then equip our kids to think about gender identity, to think about male and female in the world that we live in. And so recently, Erin and I had the opportunity to actually do a teaching for junior high students here in Southern California. And so we did a joint presentation, one of the first, it was actually the first joint presentation we did to students together. And you did pretty good, honey. I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
And the students actually, they related to you. You did well. But no, so
whatever.
We did this presentation together. And I think it was helpful for us, because what it forced us to do is try to think through how to organize our thoughts on this, because I think there's so many different stories in the news, different aspects of this issue, from gender identity to gender dysphoria to transgenderism to sex to gender to male to female to roles to image of God. So gosh, there's all of this stuff. And I think maybe what we want to do here is try to help organize it.
Yeah.
And
I think when we thought about teaching the junior hires, we realized we need to start at just really the foundational stuff. And then we realized how good that was for us to just go back and do it. And so we thought it might be helpful just to go through just some of the foundational things that we can do as parents to build a strong foundation on what it means to be made male and female in God's image, what that even means, how we talk about this with our kids. And then from there, then we filter in what the culture's saying, but we first give our kids this good foundation of what it means. And it isn't just about roles and that sort of thing or stereotypes. It's so much deeper than that.
We're actually gonna kind of do the opposite of what you just said, aren't we?
What?
Because we're starting with the culture and the lies first, and then we're gonna lay the foundation.
What do you mean?
Because on the teaching, we're going through the lies first. You said the exact opposite. And so then I didn't want to confuse the people out there listening.
Sorry. I meant, we're going to say, okay, here's the lies the culture's telling us. But as far as like our teaching, that we realize, it's like you have to start, you can't just talk about the lies of the culture without just a really in-depth teaching of gender, of the sexes, of our design. And so I think the conversations a lot of times when even in the church we talk about, oh, the culture's saying this, here's the church's response. Sometimes the church's response can be just as shallow of an understanding of gender as the culture's offering. It's like, oh yeah, here's the answer. Women are supposed to do this and men are supposed to do that. Well, that's not satisfying. That's not satisfying for me. It's not satisfying for you. And it's not satisfying for our kids.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page here, because I was just going to cancel the first podcast. Are you on the
same page as me or not?
We'll see. So here's what we want to do. The first thing we want to do is we want to first deal with a couple of the lies that we hear in the culture. And I think this is a helpful way to proceed, because we get so socialized by the views of the culture that often we come into the conversation with some ideas, maybe some false ideas that we have to disentangle from. And particularly our students, for sure, where they're on social media, they're in schools, they're surrounded by other friends who are all socialized by the culture, by Hollywood, by, whatever it is out there, and, all these different voices. And so they may have just adopted some lies. So one of the things that's most helpful, I think, to do is to start with looking at some of the claims that turn out to be lies from the culture. We're just going to deal with two of them because we think that maybe these are probably, I don't know if they're the big two, but they're definitely top bad ideas about this.
There's a lot of lies, and maybe in other podcasts, other lies will come up. But yeah, we wanted to kind of narrow it down to two to really help focus in on some of the big ones.
Yeah. And all right, so ready to get into the lies?
Okay. So
okay, first lie.
Lie number 1, we decide our own gender. Why is this a lie, Brett?
I was about to say, no, we don't. It's a lie because it's not true. But why is it not true? Yeah. Boom facts or something like that. Isn't that what the kids are saying nowadays? Boom roasted.
Okay. The kids, you sound really old when you say that.
Those young whippersnappers. All right. No, so we decide our own gender. Yeah, this is a lie. But in order to untangle from the lie, I think we need to first define some terms. Mm-hmm. So when you hear a statement like this, or if your kid comes home and says this, makes this kind of claim, notice a couple things. Number 1, we probably need some more clarity. So maybe the first question that you want to ask before you go berating your kid or lecturing them or telling them, no, they're wrong, because we want to have helpful dialogues with our own kids. You might want to just say, okay, well, tell me, what do you mean by gender? Right? If we decide our own gender, well, what do you mean by gender? And that would be then getting some clarification and trying to see if they actually understand what they mean when they say this. Because I think there's some confusion here when it comes to gender and its relationship to biological sex. So if there's two terms that we need to define here that might help us understand what's going on. So the first one would be the term sex. And the way I would define sex here in the context of this conversation is it's one of the two main categories in which we divide human beings into male and female. And of course, this applies to other living creatures as well. But its basis is in their reproductive function, right? So we talk about male and female in respect to their reproductive function. And so in this is where we refer to biological sex, because there's just a way the male body is organized and the female body is organized when it comes to sex. And this is a biological reality.
Yeah, and this is in our DNA. Every single cell in our body is male or female. Like, this is just, you can't get away from it. And that's why it is important to define it, because sex and gender will be used interchangeably, but you really do need to define them and distinguish between the differences.
Yeah, and this helps to deal with, maybe sometimes that objection comes out and says, well, there's no binary, right? Mm-hmm. You hear this a lot. Well, yeah, when it comes to biological sex, there is a binary. There's no third option here. And interesting to note, when it comes to our biological sex, number 1, it's unchanging. Okay, this is you can't change it. Even if you cut off body parts, that doesn't change how the body is organized externally and internally for reproduction. So number 1, it's unchanging, but number 2, it is it's immediately obvious in almost all examples or opportunities or. Here's my point. When when we've had kids and they've been delivered, we haven't had the ultrasound where they tell us the gender of the baby.
We were always
or the biological sex of the baby. They so we would kind of keep that as a surprise till birth. I don't want to offend those who said, well, no, it was a surprise when we found out during the ultrasound, because some people get sensitive.
Don't trigger anybody.
But So we were surprised at the moment of delivery. And so the doctor gets to make that announcement, right? It's a boy or it's a girl. And it was always immediately obvious. And that's kind of been the case throughout human history. Now, there is a very, 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 very small population who are born intersex. Because I know that's going to be the objection, and that's the objection you hear all the time. Well, what about people who are born intersex? This is a condition where their genitalia are ambiguous, right? Or they might have both sets of genitalia, or there's some kind of physical anomaly, which is, I think, the first point to make. Number one is that this represents, sadly, an abnormal condition. Okay, so this is not the norm, but this is an abnormal condition, and there's a whole bunch of questions that can come up with how do you deal with that, and what do you do with an individual like that? Okay, and then we're going to set those questions aside. We're not going to deal with that, but I just want people to know that this condition affects 0.05% of the population in North America, and that's according to the Intersex Society of North America, which of course would be a pro, helping intersex people. So intersex is not a third kind of category of sex. There is a binary here. That's just the nature of reality. There's male and there is female, okay? And so that is what we mean when we refer to sex. Okay, so the second term to define is gender. And gender refers to how we identify and then how we present ourselves to the world as either male or female. So this is our psychological belief or our mental thoughts about ourself. And what we identify, whether we identify with maleness or femaleness, and then how we present that to the world by how we dress or how we act or who we hang out with or things like that. And so we have this distinction kind of between the body and our psychology, the physical and the mental.
So a gender reveal party, which is popular now, it actually should be a sex reveal party?
Well, that's a great question. I would say no, they got it right. They got it right with the gender reveal party, because what that seems to imply is that there is this connection between the physical and the mental. That when you are born biologically female, when your biological sex is female, that what fits with that is a gender identity that's also female. Now we have some, and I think this is the issue in the culture, right? Here's the problem: is we have a culture now that says that you can take your gender identity, your thoughts, your feelings, and you can separate them from the biology. You can detach gender from biological sex. This is the narrative that you're hearing in the culture, and I think that's where we want to pause. So, as you're navigating this issue with people, the second question, once you get clear on these things, biological sex, gender identity, physical, psychological. Okay, so now that we know what we're talking about, then someone makes this further claim then, right, that you can determine your gender identity. So therefore, right, they're detaching the psychological from the physical. Mm-hmm. Before we, even engage further, I think we want to ask the question, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, why do you think that? Why do you think that we can separate our psychology here as male or female from our biology? Mm-hmm. Because the person's making a claim, or it's the claims at least implied, is that you can separate your gender identity from your biological sex, and they can mismatch. Mm-hmm. So you can be biologically female, but you can identify as male, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a claim. When people make a claim, the burden of proof generally is on them to back that up. So we want to, I think, maybe sit back here and say, okay, well, why should we agree with that claim. Just because you made the claim doesn't mean it's true. So what are the reasons why we should think that we can separate gender from biological sex?
Yeah, and I think as you're saying that, I'm thinking too, in the transgender movement that's happening today, it seems to me this article about the father and his daughter, she's wanting to detach her gender from her biology and then wanting to change her biology to then again attach her psychology to a different biology, wouldn't you say? Because she's wanting to change. It sounded like in the article that she was going through bodily changes, so it's like a detach to try to change the biology and reattach it to a new biology, which actually isn't possible,
Right.
no matter what. So it is this strange, and yeah, I think you're right. Like if people assume that, they have to show how that's possible and why they think that would be successful to do.
Yeah. And I think this is where then we can give some kind of counterexamples that are helpful to show that in all of these other areas of life, we don't accept detaching the mental or the psychological from the physical. So, for instance, if you go onto YouTube and look for a video, it's from the Washington Family Policy Institute. No. It's from the Family Policy Institute of Washington.
We'll link to it in the notes. How about that?
Okay, good idea. It's a video where a friend of mine, Joseph Backholm, goes onto a college campus, and maybe you've seen it. It kind of went viral a little bit. He went and he interviewed students about their views on this gender identity stuff, and he's asking them questions. And he's asking them, well, could I be a woman? Or what would you say to me if I told you I was a woman? And they're they're accepting of that, generally speaking. But then he says, okay, well, what if I told you I was, Chinese, right? And he's this white guy. And then he says, well, what if I told you I was a size 6'5" Chinese woman, and what he's doing is he's kind of, he's kind of taking their ideas to their logical conclusion and showing how they end up in these absurdities. It's in logic, right? This is a reductio ad absurdum. It's just you reduce an idea to its absurd conclusions to show that the idea is false. And so this is one of those ideas that we have lots of examples in the culture.
Yeah, I think that video reveals how students are quickly willing to say, well, I wouldn't say if you're a man or a woman. But then when he changes the conversation from gender and sex to race, is he Chinese? Now, they still actually didn't want to say he wasn't Chinese, even though they knew darn well he wasn't Chinese. He's a blonde white guy. But he changed it to race, and they started to smile because they could see what he was doing. So he brings it to a different biological issue and talks about race. And then he moves it to height and age. So he goes and takes them through different categories, which I think is an important thing to do and something we could do with our kids or people we're having conversations about. Does this apply to all areas that we can just simply detach from biology what we think about something and say this is now reality?
Yeah. And there are real life examples in the culture.
Yeah, lots of them actually.
If you look up, if you do a search for Rachel Dolezal, Dolezal, this is a woman who lived in the Pacific Northwest. She was part of leadership in the NAACP. She had a passion for African-American issues, and she claimed to be an African-American woman. And then it came out, and this was then blasted all over the news, that she wasn't actually an African-American woman, but that she was a white woman. And then pictures surfaced of her as a child, and it's clear, that she's a white woman. Her parents, I think, were interviewed, and it's a white couple. And she just, had kind of done some things to her skin, her hair, and to make her look more like she was an African-American woman. And was interesting to see the culture's reaction to this, because think about it. here is a woman who's detaching her biology, born as a white woman with white skin, and her identity. But she talked about identifying as a Black woman. That's how she identified. And the culture rejected it. She got reamed for this one.
As they should, right? I mean, that's where we would say, yeah, you can't lie and say that you're something that you're not. And in the area of race, we seem really clear on that. And yeah, there isn't really an argument, right, against that. So
it gives us a counterexample.
Yeah.
Right? It gives us a counterexample of when someone is detached their identity. So in this instance, it's not gender identity, it's racial identity from their biological makeup. We say, no, you can't do that. And let's just take a number of other examples there. We can take age. So for instance, let's say you get plastic surgery. You get plastic surgery where you look younger. You physically will look younger. Does that change your biological age? Of course not. If you claim to be a different species, which sadly there are real life cases of this, you can do a search.
We could link to some of those too.
Yeah, you can do a search for a guy named Gary Matthews and Boomer. You'll probably see pictures of him dressed as in a dog costume. He says he identifies as the canine species. He's Boomer the dog. And this is how he identifies. But is he really therefore a dog? Does that make him a dog? Of course not. We'd say, yeah, it doesn't matter what you think mentally about your species, what species you are, you can't change the biological facts there. So there's another instance where you don't detach the biology and the psychology. And so then what is it when it comes to gender? Why do we allow that same thing? Right? And I think the answer boils down to our desires. It's these particular desires or views I have about myself or feelings I have. Because think about, it's often put in terms of feelings. I feel like a man trapped in a woman's body. Now, there was a time I did feel like I was a man trapped in a woman's body. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but it's a big reveal right here. No, it was when I was in my mother's room.
I already knew what you were going to say.
All right, the conversation was getting so serious. I thought we gotta lighten it up here a little bit. It's getting heavy. Okay, so there has been a time when every man has been trapped in a woman's body. Okay, but besides that, I think about this language that we use.
You're talking about the language of feeling.
Yeah, it's the language of feeling, and
because that example is actually reality that you were in, and so it is.
Of me as a little
you
unborn
were actually
child.
in a woman's body.
That's right.
And that had nothing to do with your feelings because that matched up with reality. So yeah, the point being that our feelings are elevated now above reality. And so the way we feel about something is enough to say, I want everyone around me to validate my feeling rather than the biological reality that is apparent to everyone.
Yeah, and it might even be just a little step further. It's that my feelings or my desires can ultimately determine my reality, right? And so I think what we want to do there when our kids hear this or when we hear this, and I think sometimes there may be a sympathy towards it or like, hey, well, this is how someone really feels. Yeah. And we have sometimes an appropriate sensitivity, to people's feelings, but then we maybe take that too far and we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We're so careful of not offending people or telling people no that we aren't even willing to say that, well, if you feel that way, that might not be an indicator that you are that way. Mm-hmm. Like we have a problem with that. And so I think at this point, we might just want to ask a question, right? Can our feelings and our thoughts ever mislead us?
Yeah, that is a question I think we definitely want to talk about with our kids.
Yeah.
And just the idea, can our feelings betray us?
Yeah. Can
Can-
they be false?
Yeah. Can we think something about someone, and with kids, about a friend or about mom or dad? Can we think something and then that end up being wrong? Can we
like
feel
when you're mad at me in an argument and you think, man, Brett is just a real jerk. Your feelings and your thoughts betray you, honey. They betray you. And you can be wrong about how you're feeling towards me.
Sorry. I'm trying to hold it together through that example. It's just,
because that one hit home. That one
yeah,
hit home.
it really hit home.
And the reason I know that is because the same thing happens with me, right? Anyway, let's not get too personal.
But yeah, that feeling, feelings that we'll have where, even today, you and I had a misunderstanding, and I thought you,
quote unquote misunderstanding.
was a misunderstanding.
You're absolutely right.
And so I was feeling irritated at you because I thought you were saying something, and you had a completely different perspective and said, no, I said that because I was thinking this. And so my feelings betrayed me because I was coming at it from my perspective and not seeing your perspective at all.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're admitting that and confessing that here.
I said it was a misunderstanding, not a sin.
And and thankfully I was able to bring reality in and correct your perceptions.
I should have thought of a different example.
I love that example. That's great. We got another one?
Unfortunately, that just happened today, so it's fresh on my mind. So, but it's that thing, right? That our kids, and this is where we can relate with whoever we're talking to. Like our feelings betray us a lot. We can have false ideas about things, but that's the sticking point, right? Is the falseness or the wrongness, and the having to say we're wrong. Or having to say, I felt something about something that actually turned out to be false.
Yeah.
And that's a humbling thing to say, first of all. And so that's not intuitive to us, because as human beings, we don't want to admit when we're wrong. We just don't. So that's why these kinds of conversations not only lay good foundations for the conversations about sex and gender, it lays good foundations for conversations with our kids about all types of things.
Well, and we were kind of joking about the issue of, the little argument we had today, but that's true. That's another situation in conflict where you want your thoughts and your feelings to match up with reality. And so if you've misunderstood someone, or someone's miscommunicated, or there's been a misperception, we try to bring reality in to correct that misperception to help us resolve some of that conflict. And, and so, there's broad application here on this. And I think, when I typically talk to young people and I ask this question, can your thoughts or your feelings mislead you? Can they be wrong? The answer is pretty self-evident. They're like, well, yeah, of course, right? And we can all think of the examples when that's been the case. So then I think the follow-up question is, okay, when your thoughts mislead you, what do we do in that situation? Do we go along with your false thoughts? And it seems the answer is clearly no. We know this, of course, as parents. If our kid believes something that's false, we want to correct them. And we don't just go along with their false ideas. But here's a classic example of this kind of in medicine.
Yeah.
Right?
In the medical world, I was going to say it's the same thing. If we have false ideas about biologically what's going on with it, this is why we go to a doctor or someone who has some knowledge about our bodies, because they can help us to know if our feelings match up with reality of what's going on. Yeah. And the example you were going to say is one that is just common with women.
Yeah, anorexia.
Yeah.
Right? Anorexia, where a woman has, or a man.
It's most common with women.
Definitely, most common with women. So you have a young girl, let's say a 16-year-old girl, who has a body image problem. She views herself as being tremendously overweight. There's something wrong with her weight. And so she will starve herself. She will limit her food intake, in huge ways, and will virtually starve herself. And she could be a 75-pound girl, right? Kind of skin and bones. But when she looks in the mirror, what does she see? She sees someone who looks 175 pounds. And so there's this distortion of her own view of herself. We would say in that situation, her psychology or her thoughts, her mental states don't match up with the biological reality. So in that case, what do? Does the doctor say, oh, you feel like you're 175 pounds? Well, then let's go with your feelings. Let's go with how you identify, and let's put you on a strict diet. Of course not. Instead, the doctor doesn't offer some course of treatment that deals with her body, because it's the mental states that are wrong. Her thoughts are misguided. And so what do? We treat the mind, not the body in that situation. We don't allow her to detach, or when we don't affirm that detachment of body and mind.
Yeah, we try to help her see reality and how her body really is. And reality usually is not only is she not a healthy weight, she's under a healthy weight. So she's really distorted in how she's seen herself. And I've had several friends that have struggled with this. And yeah, the care for this person is never that you say, yes, you are fat. You would never affirm that. It's what can we do to help you see things the way that they really are. Yeah. And so yeah, this is why the gender stuff that's going on in the culture is detaching from reality, not only in how we treat each other, this poor dad who now is arrested and how he's treating his daughter, but it's a medical field now detaching from reality and saying the person coming in is the one who gets to say what reality is, and then we all have to respond to that.
Yeah, and I mean, let's step back and let's think about what happens then to that kid who's 13 and says, I feel like a man trapped in a woman's body. And then the doctors, these people who are supposed to be these trusted guides, say, okay, well, let's give you puberty blockers and let's, think through the process of transitioning. And so what do? They direct the treatment at the body, where you could eventually, if you go down that road, end up, if you're a female, with a double mastectomy, right? Where you literally mutilate the body, you cut off healthy body parts. I mean, this is big time stuff. And then when you then look at some folks who have been through this and listen to some ex-transgender folks, transgender regret is real. People who have done things to their body that are irreversible, and now they regret those things. And so this is a very important thing to think about, because ideas have consequences, and bad ideas, false ideas have really bad consequences. My good friend John Stonestreet will say, bad ideas have victims. And so we want to be, this is what maybe where we step back and narrate this part for our kids too. Narrate the fact that, hey, the reason we want to think carefully through this issue is because people get hurt. And you have bad ideas, it will bring harm into your life. You begin to go down this road of transitioning, or your friend goes down this road of transitioning, and it will just bring physical harm, psychological harm, spiritual harm. And that's why we care so much about this. Not because we want to just go out there and fight some culture war or something like that, but it's because these ideas within the culture have huge consequences. So, okay, we've been going here for a while.
Let's do lie number 2, and then maybe next time talk through the response.
Yeah, do we have time to go into the second one? We don't have time to go into the second lie. So here's what we'll do. In our next podcast, we're going to deal with the second lie. And then we'll get into making the case. Like, okay, what's the Christian worldview say? As a parent, how do I incorporate the Christian worldview into this issue of male, female, gender identity, biological sex, all these things? Okay? Sound good?
Sounds good.
So we dealt with the big lie this time, so we had to spend a lot of extra time on it. We will deal with what does it mean to be male and female next time.